West Penwith is a unique and ancient landscape lying right at the very tip of the UK. This iconic area of Cornwall is home to moorlands, meadows, rugged coastlines, ancient sites and communities of wildlife and people. The Penwith Landscape Partnership has uncovered many ancient sites, restored depleted habitats, engaged and connected with landowners, farmers, local communities and conservation organisations, enabling them to come together to reconnect the landscape for both people and wildlife. In this short series of podcasts, we explore the project's achievements and highlight how you can help us to preserve and protect the landscape for years to come. In this episode, Laura, the PLP Ancient Penwith Project Officer, and Matt, the PLP Access Officer, chat about access and ancient sites.
Hello, Matt.
Hello, Laura.
I suppose we'll start by introducing myself for the audience. We know each other, we work together, but I'm Laura Ratcliffe Warren. I'm the archaeologist for the Penwith Landscape Partnership with the snappy title of Ancient Penwith Officer, because most of what we have down here is ancient.
My name is Matt Watts. I work as the Access Officer for the project.
We work very closely together normally, don't we? Except when we're out, you go out strimming, I go out digging holes, and then occasionally we come back together and go, where are we going next and how do we get there? And how can we get people there safely?
What would you say, Laura, is the purpose of your project within PLP?
A lot of the project is to do with community engagement and upskilling and connecting people with the landscape. And there's so much archaeology in West Penwith that touches on all the other aspects of the project that we have. Really, it's everywhere. You can't avoid it, and it does impact on the way people do things in the area, and it's interesting as well. So my job is to look after some of the archaeology that's at risk, particularly from damage for one thing or another, and to reconnect people back with that archaeology, really. But also tied into that is yourself, because to reach the archaeology you need to get to it and you need a footpath for that. So Matt, what do you do?
So my purpose is to improve access to the heritage of Penwith, or the landscape of Penwith, both physically and intellectually. So, I mean, that's working on footpaths, bridleways, public rights of way and unrecorded paths with volunteers and with some of the cash that we've got to help the effort of managing and maintaining these things and to try and make a lasting difference with that. And then, intellectually, it's primarily been writing trail guides. So, a whole set of walking guides that join up all of these ancient sites that you're working on that show people how to get to them. And I think giving people the confidence to get to them themselves so that then they can appreciate them and providing information. They're like pooling together, because your element of work is gathering, researching and the recording stuff, isn't it? And then I'm drawing upon that and putting some of that into the trail guides, aren't I? So then that's intellectually, and then together we've been doing the digital stuff, haven't we?
We have, slightly unusual. Archaeology normally in the ground with a trowel or walking through the landscape. Forays into the digital world.
Yes.
Getting people who can't get into the landscape a bit closer to it. That has been a really interesting part of the project, actually.
So what this is that we're talking about, it's a whole series of 360 drone aerial photographs, isn't it?
It is,
over particular points within the landscape of Penwith. All visually interconnected.
It's not a virtual reality, it's a sort of, I suppose if you were being technical, you might call it augmented reality.
Yes.
So, because we're overlaying visual 360 viewpoints with writing and footpath lines and photographs and
interpreting what's in the landscape, isn't it?
Interpreting what's in the landscape.
I found that to be very rewarding. You're enabling people to experience places that they might not be able to experience otherwise, and we've had that feedback, haven't we, from folk that said, I've not been able to get there for years and years, and now I can see this place.
And we've been focusing on areas that are particularly tricky to get to for the digital side of things. I mean, that viewpoint network is brilliant. It's like what's inside our heads and how do we get it out there for people who aren't with us.
So a big part of everything that we do has been volunteers and doing stuff with volunteers, hasn't it? And so it's such a satisfying thing to spend a day with a team of people hacking through that blackthorn, clearing this a lane that you just couldn't see through at all before, and sort of uncovering stiles or whatever at either end. And but yeah, then the weekly volunteer group that do loads of stuff, the physical vegetation clearance and ancient sites is a lot of their focus, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the work they do is ecologically focused, and the work is also quite seasonal. So we definitely have like the season for hedging, hedge repairs, the season for cutting vegetation, which is sympathetic to bird nesting and other animals and plants, sort of seeding times and nesting times and cutting paths. It's easier to do at certain times of year than others, all that sort of thing. We've got 45, 55 sites that they have been managed and maintained for, well, cumulatively now 5 years, I suppose. And we know where they are. The volunteers are familiar with the sites, and some of them have become very dear to the volunteers. They really like going back to certain sites, and it's satisfying seeing that effort every year just make the job a lot easier and more manageable. And yeah, I mean, people do get attached to sites. People do anyway. And you make kind of memories, and you can feel proud that you've helped to maintain it. That kind of brings us around to what makes the area special. There's so many special places in West Penwith, and people, even if they don't know what they're looking at, they feel that it's different. It's a bit wild, it's a bit ancient feeling. I mean, it's a very special place. Lots of people from the wider Cornwall area will be like, oh yes, I love going down to West Penwith. It's really special or mysterious or whatever it happens to be that speaks to them, wild perhaps. And it's not the coast, it's the inland bits often. It feels different. The Cornish hedges look slightly different. They're very wiggly, they're much older. I mean, it's one of the oldest prehistoric landscapes that's still being used for its original purpose in Europe. I mean, it's sort of 4,000 years plus of continually used field boundaries. What you're looking at is, if it's not a prehistoric hedge, it's probably a rebuild of a prehistoric hedge that's then had an Iron Age Romano-British hedge tagged onto it, and then a medieval hedge built over the top of it and been mended. And cows still get out of holes in hedges. You've got to keep mending them, and everybody's got their own slightly different way of reading it. So you've got these kind of amazing kind of Cornish hedge of sort of, because they're stone and earth, they're quite solid and permanent, and they're a lot of effort to make, and you don't want to keep rebuilding them. So people just kept working with them. So they're still there. They sort of fossilised this predominantly prehistoric way of life, and it's not changed much in some areas. It really hasn't. And the houses that you see dotted around the moors are probably sitting on top of prehistoric settlements and then medieval ones. So you pick a good spot and you keep building on it. So you do get this sense that it's special and different and old, and certain sites do become big focal points for people. You're talking to someone that grew up here. Yeah, no, I have very fond memories of my parents taking me to a lot of the sites that we've been collectively working on, the places and the sites when I was small. I have very fond memories of going to Boss Prentice and the courtyard house settlement thing that's just past the beehive hut, and there's an amazing tree in there, and that's the best. When you are 5 or 6, that's the best climbing tree in all of the world. But yeah, here's a little set of houses that people lived in 2,000 years ago, and within the fields that they would have farmed 2,000 years ago. Like that's just incredible. That's just absolutely incredible. It's great, isn't it? It's like a fingerprint from the Bronze Age, just still there, just to be looked at.
Yeah.
With a really cool climbing tree in it. It is a special place. I mean, if you're an archaeologist in Cornwall, people are like, oh yes, West Penwith. That's a brilliant place. I mean, there's so much. Everything I look at, I have to put my blinkers on. It's like, there's so many rabbit holes that I could vanish down.
It is a particularly high density, isn't it, of ancient sites here, isn't it? Yeah. It's at the end of the land, at the end of the train line.
Yeah, and yet you say that, and they were shipping tin to the Middle East in the Bronze Age from here. So
Yes.
it is at the end of the train line, and people didn't tend to walk here over land, but they were coming here by boat, buying tin, trading for tin.
So that's I think important then to mention the Tinner's Way, isn't it? The idea that there was a watershed route sort of over the high ground, over the moors in the northern part of West Penwith, that was a transit route for tin and minerals extracted from the west, sort of around St Just, Kennedyck and all of that. The tin coast. To taking that material to sheltered anchorages over on the east, so Hale and Marazion. And this route exists in part in very old lanes, and then in big wide sort of lines across open bits of moorland. It's amazing. I'm thinking across like back of Mulfer and Bosprennus Common. You look on the aerial photographs there along the route of which is considered to be the Tinner's Way, and there are sort of scores and scores of old like track lines, path lines in the moor of where this route has been used for hundreds and hundreds of years, and where one bit of path has got eroded, someone started a new one just next to it. Yes.
Got a bit muddy.
Yes.
It's all there to look at if you can translate it with your eyes. And that's been one of the pleasures of this job, is thinking how to translate it for people so they understand. It's that when you look at a landscape scale, you think, well, why is that there? Why is that path there? And it could be a practical thing like the Tinner's Way. It's a nice dry route to carry ore from the mines to where it's getting shipped out of. But it's also perhaps going to be when high points are important to you because of their lines of visibility for whatever reason. It's a really sensible route across some land from important spot to important spot to sort of the prehistoric mind. You can sort of follow these routes back through time by looking at where the things around them have been built. And after 5 years of trundling around up on the moors with you as well, looking at things with an access kind of eye, it does make sense. You know, the landscape dictates where things are, and you think, oh, people, we think, behaved in a certain way in the Neolithic period, and we can tell that by some of the things they leave behind, the megaliths. So we know that you can often see all of the other megaliths from a megalith on the hilltop. Like, obviously, that was important.
We're talking about the quoits and
the
such,
quoits,
aren't we?
Yes. So your cromlechs, as you would perhaps call them in Cornwall. So you get these sort of huge, giant Neolithic stone structures, quite often on notable hilltops, that line up with all sorts of things, astral things and solar things and practical things, as in, we can see Mounts Bay from here. That's great.
Yes. Here's the spot.
Here's the spot. This is a really good vantage point for whatever. We can really spy on our neighbours from here. Whatever it was, who knows? A lot of it we just guess at.
But then I guess these places over time and over sort of continued periods of use, they gain significance. They would gain meaning of, like, if they were used for one thing in this period and then they were used for something else.
Keep using it over and over and over again, and then eventually you might not even know why you're still using that route, but that's the route that you use, and then you get the next time period comes along and goes, oh, well, we know that's an important spot, so we'll build our stuff around it, but leave that there where it is. And then you get this sort of repeated building and reuse and use of that wider landscape. And then you get left with all of the stuff that's still here in Penwith, which is nice. I think a lot of it's to do with people moving through the landscape, which is something that we don't really think about much now, because you're not doing it necessarily on your feet, you're doing it in a car and you're using a sat-nav, and your very existence and survival doesn't rely on you knowing how to get from your summer grazing to your winter grazing with your cows safely without losing any of them. I think a lot of what is in West Penwith is to do with people surviving in that landscape and living in it and really immersed in it, and that's really quite nice. And people haven't really changed much, but the way we do things has changed quite a lot.
But that's, you're talking of a subsistence lifestyle, of you're living off the land with what's immediately around you, isn't it?
And it's a farming landscape, back to the first farming people. So And it still works for quite a lot of the farmers today, which is why they're still using the same fields, I suppose. It's it's that place at the end of the land that hasn't changed much.
Yes.
And it's nice to reconnect the community that we're working with and hopefully informing back a little bit more with that landscape again.
To go back, you said about ecology and ancient sites, and that's been one of the unexpected things that have come out of all the various project elements: access, ecology, ancient sites, Cornish hedges, and all the rest of the combination of all of these things, and how management of paths and ancient sites can be, if done appropriately, can be ecologically beneficial as well.
They can. Yeah,
yes.
That's been really interesting for me as well, actually, as an archaeologist. And it's also interesting for the volunteers. We've got ways of looking at a landscape, and you start by looking at the path or the ancient site that you're particularly interested in. Maybe you like Iron Age courtyard houses, maybe you like Bronze Age standing stones, maybe you like engine houses. But when you're there, you notice, especially if you're cutting it down, that there's lots of plants all around them. And the remote locations of a lot of these sites does mean that they have really interesting vegetation growth on them. And a few tweaks to how you do your work, or do it at this time of year, not that time of year, or let's not trim so much of these plants, let's trim just these other ones, the invasive ones, or the ones that we know are causing damage to the ancient sites. Yeah, and we've had some wonderful eruptions of bluebells, for example, on some of the sites. And these sites haven't been cleared for years, 20 years, maybe more, some of them. And as soon as you trim it, all these other plants are just hiding there under the turf line. And as soon as the bracken and the brambles has been stripped away, they just burst forth, and you get these amazing habitats. And that's been really nice. And that, because it's so visual, you see instantly that the nature is bursting out of the ground in a bit more of an interesting manner than just bracken or brambles that are shredding your knees. It's not just good for the archaeology, it's good for wildlife just as well, just managing these sites. It's really nice to see that connecting up, and then you can link that with the farming strand of the project. And I mean, we spend so much time talking to landowners and trying to convince them to perhaps do something slightly differently, and when they can see some of this nature stuff just recovering nicely, and what with all the interesting climate change conversations that we're having at the moment and improving biodiversity, it gives people another good reason to do it. It's everything's connected. It doesn't work if you do it in isolation.
What has, let's do some stats, Laura. What has your project achieved physically?
Physically?
Physically,
we've cut down a lot of bracken and a lot of brambles. I reckon we've probably worked on 55, 60, probably a few more. I have to sit down and do the firm number crunching, but let's call it 50, somewhere around there. So we've improved the condition of and the access to at least 50 ancient sites. We've surveyed, I don't know, about maybe 20.
And that surveying, that's some with volunteers and some with
volunteers, some with archaeological sort of technical assistance from a professional archaeologists. A combination of the two, if we can possibly manage it. We've done some of it by hand. We've gone out and done some of it digitally with modern GPS technology as these things have evolved. I mean, we've made site records of, I don't know, we're getting up to 100 new site records now, or enhanced site records. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's amazing, yeah.
We've photographed about 300 sites. So those photos all will go into the formal record that the county holds for the sites in the county. There's sort of 6,000 ancient sites or heritage sites that have been recorded in West Penwith, and so many that haven't been recorded. So yeah, quite a lot of stuff we've done, I would say. With reconstruction drawings.
Hey, yes.
They're good. 9 of those, another 4 to go. We've excavated 4 sites. lockdown had a bit of an impact. But what about your stats, Matt? I bet you can remember exact numbers better than I can.
I happen to have a couple written down in front of me.
I should have done that.
No, so far we've written 11 trail guides. Around 26 kilometres of the path network, rights of way and otherwise, have benefited from our activity in some way. 30 volunteers trained in path survey, and then approximately £40,000 invested in the network in terms of physical improvements. For me, in terms of the longevity of it, because that's something that we're constantly thinking about, is
what's the point?
What's the yes? Yeah.
If you do that, is it going to keep on being done?
Exactly.
That question that we all get asked so much.
Making a lasting difference. And for those ones, it's working in partnership with the parish councils, so that once we've cleared a path like that, getting the parish council to add it to their path cutting map, so that onward maintenance is taken care of. And it's an immensely satisfying thing, because it's not only have we uncovered something, but then you've set in place the mechanism for making sure that it stays that way.
So inevitably a lot of the sites that I've been working on, because you're clearing a footpath line and I'm clearing, well, not me personally, but I'm planning and organising the clearing of a site which is generally a bit bigger, a small area in the moorland where there's a couple of roundhouses, say Bronze Age roundhouses, or some standing stones, or some barrows are getting encroached on by vegetation. There's, generally speaking, a bit of grazing happening in the area, but of course the cows can't get in if the gorse is up to their chins. So if we can break open more clearings for them to get into, then they continue to trample the invasive sort of gorse and brambles and bracken, and the sort of keep it grazed low. So a lot of what we've perhaps been doing and breaking into really overgrown areas with our extra manpower, and then it becomes a much simpler job for then somebody else to maintain it, or the volunteers.
How can people provide sort of ongoing support to the aims of your project?
My project? Well, keep visiting these sites. If you see something's not right, report it. With archaeology, a lot of it is just confidence. Like people are already interested often, but giving them the confidence to realise that they are able to spot things, and it is useful information, and it's worth doing, Don't just ignore it and walk past it. Tell somebody if it doesn't look quite right.
Yeah, I'd say to everyone that I interact with and work with, who mentions a footpath problem to me, I say, have you reported it to Cornwall Council? They've got a brilliant reporting mechanism on their website. Report a footpath issue.
Well, that's very nice. We don't often get to sit in the same room and chat, do we, Matt? Just, we're usually out and about, dashing around. So, that was a pleasure to sort of take the time to, just talk it all through for a bit, isn't it? Yes, we've been talking about access and ancient sites, so thanks for listening.
Thanks to Laura and Matt. Next week we have Katie, the PLP Digital and Communications Officer, and Sue, the PLP resident artist, talking about the visual art element of the project. The Penwith Landscape Partnership is a 5-year project supported by National Lottery players through the National Lottery Heritage Fund. To find out more about our work and our partners, please head to penwithlandscape.com. For links and references from each episode, please refer to the show notes. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please rate and review on your podcast platform. Thanks for listening.